Legacy, we have survived the Biapalooza. That was 2 weeks in a row that were pretty tough for a lot of us. You'll notice the number of people kind of coming up who had to make that tough decision. Do I cut someone that I don't really want to cut, or do I just play nobody? And you'll see how that kind of worked out in a number of different ways. Crazy enough, though, for the second week in a row where buys were a huge factor, green was the trend. There were certainly a lot of high scores, not by me, but by a lot of other people, really made a point to overcome these buys, put some good people in the lineup, and the scores kind of reflected that. So before I go on and complain more about myself, let's just talk about the NFL first before we get to our Week 6 results. Only a couple weeks ago, I suggested everyone went to their roster and decided who should stay and who should go, and who knew that actual NFL teams might have been listening. Coming into Week 7, we've had a couple weeks in a row now of some major shifts that I thought would be worth mentioning, because some of us, if you're not doing so well, maybe you're considering some major shifts. Maybe this is inspiration, but the reasons why I think would be a little bit different. I think the team that pops up first is obviously New York Jets for a couple reasons. I already kind of spoke last week about, the big decision and getting rid of the head coach and all that mess. And sure enough, at this point in time, just after the release, Rodgers, who is a noted critic of mainstream media and yet is kind of a part of it now, made it very, very clear that he had nothing to do with the firing, and that even though they had some verbal altercations and some disagreements, that they would have worked it out. And this was just as much a surprise to him as it was to everyone else. And yet 1 week later, they hired his bestest buddy as the wide receiver, traded for, and now Davante Adams is going to be a Jet. Maybe a few weeks after a few people thought that they would, but does make you kind of think if Rodgers does have some input. I don't know. He's always been very skeptical, so maybe you should follow his advice and do your own research and not just listen to the person on TV talking. But this did get me thinking a little bit about what would be next. Now, we do have some other coaches who could be on the chopping block. Most notably after Dallas just got absolutely embarrassed by the Lions. If you didn't catch that, it was near 50 to under 10. That would be probably one of the odds-on favorites, but personally, and if you like gambling, if you don't, I don't know why you'd be in this league, but if you like gambling and you can gamble on things like this, I'm just saying check the odds for Jacksonville's coach, because you're looking at the New York Jets situation just multiplied by a little bit. Now, to kind of remember why and what happened before the Jets fired their head coach, well, they had a London game where they lost a game they were supposed to lose against one of the only undefeated teams in Minnesota. But their owner is Woody Johnson. I'm going to pause while you giggle at his name. And yes, he is the same Woody Johnson, who's a noted kind of Trump supporter, also was the U.S. ambassador to the UK and Johnson & Johnson affiliate. So when he was in London, it was noted that he was there with a bunch of his billionaire friends talking about awesome billionaire things, only to watch his team get, and as probably he quotes, embarrassed. And then he made a pretty rash decision. The reason I'm suggesting it is not because I think the decision's bad, but let's start making predictions as to what's next. Jacksonville now celebrates their second week in a row in London, and they are kind of London's darling team. When they were sticking London with people, it was the Jacksonville Jaguars all throughout. So they actually get at least a game there every year. But now it's their second game in a row. Last week, they coughed one up to the Bears. This week, they're playing the Patriots, who is not a good team, but they do have a new, young, and exciting quarterback people are talking about. So if the Jaguars lose, we could look at their owner, Shahid Khan, and if that name sounds familiar, you might be a wrestling fan. He is a co-owner of a wrestling company. Not that one. They made the Netflix documentary. The other one, the other big one. I guess you have to know more wrestling if you know that. But he also is an owner of the Fulham Football Club, and he did have a bunch of his rich people friends watching his rich people team do their thing, and they did not do their thing. 2 weeks in a row, billionaire owner, ego. Kind of sounds like if the Jacksonville Jaguars are out, so is Doug Peterson as head coach. But we'll see. In terms of another team, and let's be honest, this is the last team I want to talk about, both because it's the last team I'm going to talk about today, but also it's the last team I ever want to talk about, my Cleveland Browns. They're the other ones who made a trade. Now I could look on the positive and talk about the Bills, who get Amari Cooper, and could be a massive steal to any Cooper owners out there. Instead, I'd like to focus on my Browns that are just now trading away everything, because just recently I was around a few people that have football teams that they like, and they were talking to me about what it's like to watch their team play, and how much more nervous they get and how excited they get on a win. And I guess I just can't relate, can I? Because that's not really something us Brown fans do right now. And it really is to do with not just our anemic offense that scores anywhere between 13 and 18 points every week, and I'm not joking, that's our margin and you can bet on it, But once again, not to mention him too many more times, but we did sign someone who was accused of so many things, and we signed him after the accusations to one of the largest guaranteed contracts of all time. The only reason I mention this is when I saw Denver was playing on the Thursday nighter. That reminded me of when I did go and see Denver at Cleveland many, many years ago on a Thursday night, and I thought about bad quarterbacking decisions because most of you know me. If you see me show up to a draft with a Cleveland Browns jersey, I bought it that week. Let's go Brady Quinn, in for a comeback. But their current quarterback actually has only been in Cleveland for about 3 years, not 3 full seasons yet, but it is true. He has had more settlements than thrown touchdowns. So let's just that sit in for a good second. So if you do have a favorite football team, feel great about cheering for it, because the alternative is being a Browns fan. It took a few weeks, but Connor looks like he's out of hibernation. 188 isn't quite at the 190, 200 that we saw him hit a lot last year, but certainly this is him getting back to form. Unfortunately for Maxon, if you look at your team, you were either off or on. You did have some people do quite well, but obviously not quite enough if you didn't hit your predicted. I mean, realistically, we can cover your team pretty quick here. Monty was, I think, the running back 6. He was just out of our top 5. But Purdy was our QB 5. But you can see it all already. You got Gobbert and the Olive Garden down here. And had you kind of gone in and maybe put in a few other people here, you had Lockett, you had Andrews, you had some people to do things. Now, would you have made up the 40 points, 50 points, almost 60 points? No, wait, 50. Yeah, I was right the first time. No, you wouldn't have, so not much you could have done. On your side, Connor, you did have a bunch of people ringing that bell. Zay Flowers was our wide receiver 5. Mixon was our running back 2, but no one had our running back 1 in Tucker this week. And then you just had a bunch of people. I mean, technically on your bench, I think you had a tight end 3 in Ingram. But Pitts did well enough, and that hurts me even to say, but you definitely had some overperformances that did not ring the top 5 in both Hurts and Johnson, so let's not talk about it too much. This was obviously a win that you needed. You got up to 2 wins. We're going to see soon in the table, though, that there's so much tightness in the middle here. Don't make a joke about that one. That realistically, any team right now going on a 2 or 3 game win streak, you'll jump a bunch of positions. So as of right now, Maxon, no stress. You've scored enough. You've done well enough that you definitely have your playoff spot. But as you can look at the records here in a second, we're going to see it's not going to take that much to make things shift. Speaking of which, and looking at the depth of our tying, these are 2 now 3-3 teams, both playoff teams, both probably deserving that win. I know I say that a lot, but 150 probably should win you most things. Unfortunately, not for this one. You played Marco, our number 2, in Rennie. Rennie's another one that rang that bell a lot. He did have our quarterback 2 in Goff. You also had Godwin, who was our wide receiver 1. That's a huge performance from him. And then just the fact that you had both running backs overperform, I think, is awesome for you. McLovin didn't crack the top 5, but obviously 20 plus really made up for the fact that you were gambling here. And if you look at your bench, my guess is you just didn't want to drop any of these people, so you kept Kelsey rolling through the bye. And it worked for you. It didn't cost you too much. Marco, you did have the return of A.J. Brown, which I'm sure you're pumped about, because not only did he come off the injury report, he was our wide receiver 4, and Lazard, of all people, our wide receiver 2. Jets were just throwing a plenty, or at least just to those 2. Let's be honest, that's about it. But what kind of kicked you the most? Obviously, I mean, okay, I'll just say it before I forget. Pittsburgh was our defense 3, but Etienne coming up, coughing it up, and then taking off. Playing anyone would have been better than him, but actually, had you played Mattinson instead of him, you actually would have made Rennie pay for that tight end mistake. But ifs and buts are candy and nuts. Like I said, you're both right now playoff teams in that tie front of 3-3, so things could be a lot worse, gents. Wasn't that long ago I made a joke about Kent not winning since he's been married, and I believe he's on a 3-game win streak. So you're welcome, Kent, as a delayed wedding present. Sorry, rest of the league, because Kent's now up to 3rd with all of his scoring. Another situation here where we have 2 3-3s, but we see Jeff with his scoring is just outside. He had a pretty big underperformance, and I think you can look at Harrison getting knocked out as kind of a big culprit there. Obviously, Breece Hall coming back and having his best performance so far. He was our running back 5. That's going to make you happy. Debo was just outside of the top 5 in wide receivers. But Connor had a really fart of a game. Arizona kind of hurt you in general with Harrison getting it put into concussion protocol. And you dance with Danny Dimes, you know what you get. Sometimes he's on, sometimes he's off, and sometimes he's just Danny Dimes. And who would have known that Keenan Allen would have been a big scorer for you? But Kent, crazy enough, your boy at quarterback, and he was our boy essentially. He was a quarterback 1 on the week, huge performance. Henry was our running back 3, but you can do the same math technically 2. Brock was our tight end 5, so you had people ringing the bell all up and down the lineup. And realistically, the other thing that you kind of avoided that a lot of people had to deal with is non-defensively, Dallas pulling that far. I can't believe we need to change our defensive system. If you watch that game with the amount that Detroit scored on them, Dallas should be at least -10, but they're not. And you had a receiver just underperform slightly, so not the worst thing in the world for sure. Jeff, like I said, you're tied 3-3. A lot of people are, so I wouldn't sweat it. But Kent, this was a huge comeback. You're now up to top 3 in the league. League, Gene does not give us this option too many times in the season. Only every once in a while does he appear mortal. This was one of the weeks due to buys, and unfortunately, Tim was kind of trying to outbuy things and didn't quite capitalize, and I don't really know if that said something I didn't mean to, but if we take a look here, this was Tim's week of just recovery, so he was hoping for the best. He did put up a bit of a fight, but realistically, not too much. You couldn't capitalize. You did go over your performance, Tim, but, Kittle probably had a lot to do with that. But that's kind of all you had to offer. Whereas, Gene, you didn't do much and you actually underperformed. Your Cincinnati kids didn't do it for you like they've been doing it recently, but you did have the running back 4 in Bijan. Bucky got you some points. And realistically, between Tim forgetting about the defensive thing, I don't think he forgot. He just didn't want to drop anyone, and we're already filled. This is the second person to have a Kansas City person to do that. Although maybe I would think about dropping Rice. I don't think he's coming back, Timmer. Anyway, doesn't matter. Tim, unfortunately, you dropped down, but you'll notice you're only 1 game off, tied for like 2nd or 3rd. We'll find out in a second. But the win streak continues, 6-0, and we can do the math and figure out exactly how long this win streak is if we go back to last season. So the question is going to keep remaining. Is anyone going to take down Gene this year? Well, I can say who would knock him off, and in this particular week, Woody and I would definitely not. Both of us did not have great weeks, underperforming. Now, I only slightly underperformed, but I wasn't supposed to perform. And this was actually a weird one because I watched the Red Zone kind of live in the morning, not live, but in the morning on delay. And for me, it was new. And I actually thought there was chances. I had a puncher's chance at this one, but I had just too many massive underperformances. My wide receivers sucked. My tight end sucked, and he went off the week before. So the fact that I had a quarterback who did step up in love, and the fact that obviously Tracy, I think, was a great pickup, couldn't make up for it. And even if you look at my bench, CJ, the only one going in, but that was the right decision. I just had nothing in. I needed Shakir to have an awesome night on Monday because technically going into it, I did have a puncher's chance, especially when Cook went out. But Garrett Wilson went out for Matty, and you had a wide receiver 3 performance, his best of the year, and just overall consistency. You kind of had me on that one. And you also had our tight end 4 in Trey McBride. And so it more than made up for the fact that Dax sucked and Cook didn't play. So this was a week I probably could squeak one out. And if I don't make the playoffs, or if I'm in a spot I don't want to be in, I can point to this week as a rut-row. Matty, you survived. This was a tough week for all of us. You got through it, 3-3, and you're right in the mix. I've made enough references to it, so I might as well just show it quick. Obviously, there's 3 of us down here in the basement fighting for points for and against and any win we can get. Everybody else in the league is pretty much at 3-3 in this massive tie, and then Gene's dancing, looking to hopefully maybe clinch in the next couple weeks. Who knows? So it always is going to turn into every single week who can do it. Now, we do have some people here who are punching big. Obviously, Rennie's outscored him. Connor, all the way down here, has just been super unlucky, so please watch out for him because he is not a slouch in any way, shape, or form. And then the rest of us are just going to have to fight for it, I guess, right? So how does that fight look this week? Well, Kent, let's see if you can keep the win streak going on me. We also have a bunch of obviously 3-3 matchups here. So our 7 versus our 5. We got our 4 versus our 2. And as I said, don't sleep on it. Connor, this was a rematch that you've been waiting for. Is Gene vulnerable enough? Can you take him down? Can you avenge a former loss and make a big stink in this particular pool? Now, because the rest of us are still losing a lot, Gene's going to have to lose a couple games to lose his top spot. But hey, losing is contagious, so is winning. So let's see how this one works out. Anywho, folks, obviously every matchup's going to matter, so check your lineups because it's a funky week this week. Saying this week is funky just means we've got a few unorthodox matchups. And I'm not talking about the Thursday nighter that this is hopefully squeezing in just before, because I don't think we're super pumped about that one unless they happen to be one of your teams. But this is our third week in a row of UK games, and this is our last one in Europe for a couple weeks, but the last one definitely in the UK. So that's going to be one kind of twist. The other is we're back to 2 Monday nighters. Maybe the NFL just knew these games were not going to be the greatest, so let's try and double down on Monday. Not so sure. But like I just said, every week is going to matter, so hopefully this week we don't have to leave as many blanks, and this time we can actually put together some active rosters. The buys are not as significant. Dallas, who you might be actually looking to give a break after last week, and the Bears, so not a bad week to play Kent overall, because at least he can't kill me with his quarterback. So as I said, going to be super interesting. Everyone is still in the hunt, and I don't know for how many more weeks we can say that. So best of luck in week 7, staying in the fight.